Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Spiritual Unity Radio Network, a station dedicated to the concept that all manifestations of the divine are equally valid. Join Reverend Terry Power HP, Robin McKean, and all the hosts for programming covering a wide range of spiritual topics, right here on Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to an emerging forest, a safe place where we have the freedom to think about life without judgment. We take a look at society, we examine it, and we allow for the possibility of something new, something different. And now, here's your host, Alan Ritter.
Well, welcome everyone to this April 15th show of An Emerging Forest on Spiritual Unity Radio Network. And tonight we're joined by two guests, one here at the top of the hour and one a little while later on in the program. And they're both have been a part of Experimental Farm Network. They are the co-founders of that network. And I'd like to introduce to everyone to Nathan Kleinman. Hi, Nate. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Good. I guess I always start these programs off with an introductory program, just saying, how did you get started? What is your background? And we'll lead with that background into where it's taken you initially, and then where it's taking you, in the moment. So why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Nate Kleinman. I was born in Philadelphia, grew up in the suburbs of Philly. I live in New Jersey now, and I'm a farmer. Been here for 4 years now. I went to Quaker school, Abington Friends School, and then I went to Georgetown and studied foreign politics and diplomacy. I ended up getting involved in political activism soon after I graduated. I was really quite disturbed by what was happening in the world, in particular at that moment with the genocide in Darfur in Sudan. I launched into a 12-day hunger strike outside the White House, and that was kind of my introduction to activism. I got involved with a guy named Simon Deng, who was a former child slave from South Sudan, and he organized something the next year called the Sudan Freedom Walk in 2006. I did a lot of organizing with Simon over the next few years, and we're still quite close. And I've done a lot of political work. I started volunteering for political campaigns when I was 10 years old, and I have ended up working on a number of campaigns. I worked on President Obama's campaign in 2008. I worked for a U.S. Senate campaign in Pennsylvania in 2010, Joe Sestak's campaign. And then I ran for office myself in 2012 for U.S. Congress in Pennsylvania. And I was involved at the time in the Occupy movement. They called me the first Occupy candidate. And then I was that election did not go so well. I ended up not even on the ballot after having been on it. I withdrew because I was facing a challenge to my petitions and didn't have the time or the money to address the challenge, and had been threatened by the lawyers of the other side that if I lost the case that they would petition the judge to have me pay for their legal fees, which they're allowed to do in Pennsylvania. So I decided to be a write-in candidate and ended up not going anywhere. But about 6-8 months after that, Hurricane Sandy hit in New Jersey and New York, and a number of my friends from Occupy Wall Street started Occupy Sandy up in New York. And not very long after that, one of them called me up and said, hey, we could really use somebody to start organizing Occupy Sandy in New Jersey. And so we started having conference calls about 8 days after the storm, and we had them every night for months. And I ended up organizing Occupy Sandy New Jersey with a number of other people over the next year and a half. I spent all my time doing that. I quit the job that I had at that time for working for a union, and pretty much that was what jump-started the rest of my life. I saw firsthand that climate change and the extreme weather caused by it was going to continue to wreak havoc on people's lives, and it was especially going to hurt people who are already living on the margins and already struggling. And that's what happened in New Jersey. And I worked on storm recovery work from the southern part of New Jersey all the way to north of New York City, up along in Bergen County, where the Hackensack River flooded, where that's a tidal river, and there were trailer parks there that were just swamped, and the entire coastline of New Jersey really was hit hard, and the communities that were poor and working class did not get the kind of resources from the government that they deserved, and they didn't get the kind of resources that I saw going to fix boardwalks and to business districts. And so that was one thing that Occupy Sandy, New Jersey, definitely did do, was focus our energy on those hard-hit communities. So realizing that climate change is a social justice issue, that became that I started thinking, well, what can I do to really get at the root of climate change? And while I was attending a convergence on permaculture up in Quebec, actually, I was listening to a talk by a guy named Eric Tonesmeyer about perennial industrial crops, and he talked about how there's so many amazing plants out there that could be grown on a massive scale as staple crops if we put a little bit more research into them, a little bit more time and energy into focusing on getting these things up to the capability where they could really, be a massive part of our agricultural system. Things like perennial wheat, perennial oil seeds, things that could replace genetically modified corn and soy. So I, having been involved at the time in Occupy Sandy, I realized that we can do a lot with volunteers, and Occupy Sandy mobilized tens of thousands of volunteers with volunteers working, using the internet. And I thought, well, what if we applied the same ethos of crowdsourcing and citizen science to the problem of industrial agriculture? And I thought, well, we need to have a huge network to get people working on plant breeding projects and sustainable agriculture research, and that's how the Experimental Farm Network was born. That was 2013, and I had met Dusty, who will be on in a little bit, doing Occupy Vacant Lots through Occupy Philly. That was a spin-off group that did urban farming projects around Philly. And we decided that we would work together, and I had a large seed collection at the time, and we started figuring out what we were going to grow, trying to look for land outside the city so we could expand our operations, and started thinking about what this website, the Experimental Farm Network, would look like. And I'm really happy and proud to say that it exists now at experimentalfarmnetwork.org. And we've been farming in southern New Jersey now for the past 4 years. We're in our 5th season now. Dusty's actually, this is his first year not here of all those years. He's back in Minnesota. He'll talk more about that later. And I am really happy to be living this life as a farmer, but I'm also really fed up with what's happening in this country right now politically. So I made the decision just a few weeks ago to launch another congressional campaign here in New Jersey because there's an open seat, and the candidate that's endorsed by the Democratic Party is way out of step with the party, in my view. So I decided to go for it, and people can read more about that at nateforcongress.com.
Wow. So in general, I look at government as being anti-fertility because they're all about rules, and they're all about, saying, oh, that plant is not allowed to function like that, or that organism isn't allowed to function like that. We must regulate how it's allowed to function. So it's interesting that someone like you as a farmer is looking at office and saying that's something, instead of just staying as a farmer, as being an activist as a farmer, you want to get your hands into government. Is there something there that can be repaired?
I think our government is deeply flawed. I think that there are a lot of systemic problems that need to be addressed. But I also believe that it's critical that we try, because the government has so much power to do evil and to do terrible things, and unfortunately, so many of those things have been done. I think we need to turn the tide. We need to roll back so many of the different problems that government does cause, and specifically in the environmental realm and the agricultural realm. The government has been a huge problem. I will say that I think the government has done some fantastic things as well through the years. We get a lot of the seeds that we use for our research from the USDA, which has been collecting seeds from around the world and preserving them at gene banks around the country that grow and preserve these rare varieties. And they have close to 1 million different plants. And without that resource, we would be in a lot worse position than we are right now. But the big problem is corporations and the nexus between corporations and the government. We have companies like Monsanto and Syngenta and huge companies that started as chemical companies and are now out there masquerading as agricultural companies, as seed companies, when really their biggest job, as they see it as corporations, is to create seeds that they can maintain legal control of, that can be sold in concert with their chemicals that they really make their money on. So that's where, they may talk about genetically modified plants being these are going to feed the world and they're going to end poverty, and that's the only way we're going to feed the planet in 50 years. But that's BS. The only way we're going to feed the planet is if we get people growing organically, small scale, all across the country and all around the world. The industrial agriculture, GMOs are used, the most prominent GMOs, the most common ones that are the vast majority of all the GMOs that are on the market, are things like Roundup-ready corn and soybeans that Monsanto sells, which are plants that were genetically engineered to withstand herbicide applications. And Roundup is a horrible, toxic poison that they have convinced government regulators is safe, and they have done this through lying and fraud. This is all being demonstrated. It's all coming out right now thanks to a lawsuit in California, a class action lawsuit from over 3,000 farmers who developed lymphoma. And the plants withstand the application of this herbicide, and so it's destroying ecosystems now. All the farmland is being put into. It's happened already. Corn and soybeans. The Roundup gets applied all over the field. The weeds get killed, but they're growing all the way to the edges of the field, so there's no more natural habitat. The insects that used to live around that thrived on some of those weeds, they're not there anymore. That affects the birds. It affects everything. And the Roundup also destroys the healthy bacteria in the soil, all of the life in that soil. And unfortunately, it doesn't affect a lot of pathogenic bacteria, things like Listeria, E. coli, botulism. Those things are proliferating. So this is a huge problem, and it exists because government has been controlled by people who are in league with these corporations, who often went from working for these corporations right into government, or who go from government right into working for these corporations. So when you have the USDA governed by people who are Monsanto lobbyists or work for these in the industry, and they believe what they're told by the corporate bosses, or maybe they don't believe it, but they go along with it anyway for cynical reasons, you end up with massive problems and people all across the country using something that is toxic and terrible, and they think it's safe, and that's a problem of government. And if we had a government of the people who understand that they are beholden to the people and not to corporations, then things might be different. And that's a big part of why I'm running.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more cynical than that. I believe that government has always been of the rich and by the rich and for the rich. And as far as the background, sort of, you probably know all the background on Roundup. Roundup is a modified organophosphate, and the original organophosphate. It's sort of, why do they call Roundup? They call it glyphosate. They're trying to mask the fact that phosphate is in there. They say glyphosate instead of saying, oh, it's a phosphate, which some people might actually connect back to some of the earlier organophosphates like DDT, etc., and understand that it's a horrible poison.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I am a student of history. I totally understand what the history of this country has been, and absolutely, you're right that it has been government of the rich, government of the powerful. But it is what we have, and it has so much power. I do believe that if we can take the government from the rich and powerful, then we might have a chance. We might have a fighting chance. And climate change is such an urgent problem. I believe that without concerted action from the government, there's very little that all the rest of us can do just outside of government. And, I recognize that I'm a long shot in this campaign, and I'm going to continue fighting whether or not I'm inside government. I believe that issues like corporate power in the USDA and so many other critical issues have to get out there. And my campaign, I talk about a number of things besides the environment and climate change and agriculture. social justice is at the core of my campaign, and I believe that we absolutely must fight against white supremacy, against patriarchy, transphobia, homophobia, and bigotry of all kinds. I believe we've got to end mass incarceration and fight police brutality and corruption. We've got to stand up for women's rights, for LGBTQ rights. We need universal health care. I believe we need a universal basic income. We've got to end the war on drugs. We've got to treat immigrants fairly and refugees. We've got to fight sex trafficking and sexual abuse and violence, domestic violence and child abuse. There's so many different issues that the government has a real central role in, and unfortunately, the current government is doing all the wrong things. So I really believe that the more we get people talking about this, the better things can be in the future. And if people don't discuss the problems and hear about these problems and hear about possible solutions, they're not going to have their minds open to that. And unfortunately, the way the public discourse goes in this country in this age of Trump, politics is the big story right now. And Trump sucks up all the oxygen in the room, but we've seen in the past when there have been interesting campaigns in the past year and a half that the press will cover those. So I'm a late entry into this campaign, but I'm running because I believe that we need to something needs to shake up this race in particular, but the entire narrative on the Democratic Party right now. It's become a corporate party. If it perhaps it always was one, but we need to have real progressive candidates standing up and fighting for what's right. Otherwise, we're not going to get anything done. And unfortunately, the current candidate who the Democrats support here in South Jersey is a guy named Jeff Van Drew. He's a state senator, and he's considered the most conservative Democrat in the Democratic Legislative Caucus. He gets a 100% rating from the NRA for his consistent opposition to gun control. He's taken money from the NRA, and he actually lied to a group of high school students about it quite recently and was confronted the next day on camera by one of them. He voted against gay marriage as recently as 2012. He wants to bring back the death penalty. He's opposed raising the minimum wage. He wants to take New Jersey out of the Regional Climate Change Consortium. And he doesn't even have an issues page on his website. He doesn't stand behind these things that are in his terrible voting record. And yet, because there's currently a Republican who's retiring from this seat, the powers that be believe that this guy has the best chance of winning. But I think that kind of cynical politicking really is one of the biggest problems with the Democratic Party. They don't recognize that this is a truly swing district where people will vote for the person and not the party. And in fact, the current Republican, I've heard many people say they think that he is more progressive than this conservative Democrat who the party bosses want to replace him. Frank LoBiondo, the retiring Republican, is considered an environmentalist, and he's pro-gay rights, and he's got a pro-union record and a lot of support from union people. So it's a really strange race that this is what's happened here. But I think that if people hear about this race, if they realize that there is an alternative, and that they don't have to just follow along with what the party bosses say, that they can nominate a real progressive, and we can have a real chance of winning this seat, so that when the Democrats take over Congress in November, they do it with people who are actual Democrats. And I really do believe that even somebody who is as progressive as I am can win this district. This is not Donald Trump may have won the district. He won it by less than 5 points. But 4 years earlier, Barack Obama won it by more than 8 points, and he won it 4 years before that too. So this is a real swing district, and it's considered one of the most likely to swing to the Democrats. So this primary is critical. The person who wins this primary is likely to win this seat in November, and I'm hoping that it's going to be me.
So a few minutes ago, you said you were a long shot, and now you changed your language a little bit. So which are you?
Well, I would say I say I'm a long shot because Van Drew has got the support of the party establishment. He's going to have the endorsement of all the local county parties, so he'll have the best position on the ballot. He's going to have the most money behind him, and he's going to have ads on TV distorting his record, and if he thinks that I'm enough of a threat, distorting mine. So there's no doubt that I am this is going to be an uphill climb. But I do believe that if I can get the word out, if this race becomes a story, and if people across the district learn that I'm running, then they're going to vote for me. So, by its nature, it is a long shot. I don't have a lot of time. The primary is on June 5th, and my name was just certified on the ballot last Thursday, so I have less than 2 months to run this campaign. But I think that because I'm a farmer and I'm going to be out there farming and working, and if the press wants to interview me, they're going to have to come find me on the field a lot of the time. It's not like I'm going to be able to go to every event in the district. This is going to have to be a media-driven campaign. There are hundreds of thousands of people in this district. There's no way that I'm going to be able to shake hands with all of them in the next 2 months. But we've seen, that's maybe the one thing that I can admire in Donald Trump is that he ran a very non-traditional campaign and managed to win.
So I was thinking that if you wanted to, the only way to grab the attention is, as you said, to have it be a media-driven campaign, and to do something to get that would be media-worthy. And I'm sure from your activist days, you could think of a million. You have just enunciated the issues, so you would be able to do something that would be media worthy, and that not media worthy, that would have to be covered in such a way to get your name out there and to get the issue discussed with the curve that you wanted to put on it. That would, if it is going to be a race that you would probably not do well in, at least you would get the issue out there and get people aware of it.
Absolutely. I'm going to be. It's going to be an interesting campaign. I'm not going to tip my hand yet, but I will. I hope you'll and all your listeners will be paying attention and keeping an eye out, because this is. There's not a lot of time to get the attention of a lot of people.
Yep. Well, everyone, we're going to take the bottom of the hour break right now, and we'll come back and we'll talk about a more focused talk on the Experimental Farm Network in the rest of the show. So hang on, and we'll be right back.